My child talks to someone who isn't there. They say children are more connected to the unseen than we are, that their innocence allows them to perceive things our minds have learned to reject. When my daughter Ellie began speaking to someone who wasn't there, I smiled, indulged her, and called it an imaginary friend. At first, she was 3 when it began. By 4, she was whispering in dead languages I couldn't identify. By 5, she knew things no child should know. I kept a journal. I recorded everything. I thought maybe I would write a book one day, share my strange story on parenting forums or in one of those quirky essays about the wonders of childhood. But this isn't that kind of story, because Ellie never had an imaginary friend. What she had was older than anything I could comprehend. Something languageless, something that doesn't need form. It only needs a mind to hide inside. A host. A vessel. And I let it in. I documented it all because part of me hoped someone would. Believe me. Someone would read this and say, I see it too, I understand. You weren't crazy. But this isn't a plea for understanding anymore. It's a warning, because it moved through her, and now it waits for someone else. If you hear whispers in your child's room at night, if they speak of someone with no name, no face, no history, walk away. Burn this journal. Forget this story. Forget you ever heard the name Ellie, because the more you listen, the more it notices you. Chapter 1. The Whisper Games. It began on a Tuesday. I remember because that was trash day, and the recycling bin was already full. Ellie was in her room, humming to herself, sitting in the middle of a puzzle she wasn't really solving. I passed her door and heard her whispering. I paused. It was just soft chatter like a child talking to herself. Nothing strange. I almost moved on, but then she stopped humming, and in the sudden silence I heard her say, "He says you can't. Come in." "Not yet." I turned around. "Who says that, sweetheart?" I asked, stepping inside. She looked up at me with those wide green eyes. So calm. "My friend. He lives in the crack." My stomach did something strange, twisted a little. I looked where. She pointed. A tiny split in the drywall near the corner of her room. A normal crack, maybe from settling or poor construction. Harmless. "What does he look like?" "He doesn't look. He feels." I blinked. "He feels?" Ellie nodded, then went back to her puzzle. At dinner, I told my husband Michael what she said. He laughed. "Kids say weird stuff all the time. You remember the time she told us the moon was crying?" I remembered. And it was cute then. This felt different. Over the next few days, the whispering increased. I would hear her at night, having full conversations in the dark. At first, I thought she was pretending, but her voice changed when she spoke to it, like she was echoing something back. One night, I pressed my ear to her door. I heard her say, "Yes, I remember." The forest was full of teeth, but we ran. We always ran. That was not a game. I opened the door quickly. She was sitting on the floor, facing the crack. "Ellie," I said, my voice sharp. "Who are you talking to?" She didn't look away. "He says you shouldn't ask. It's rude." "There's no one there, Ellie. It's just a wall." "He doesn't like when you say that." Her tone was flat, cold. The air in the room felt wrong. Still, but not quiet, like everything was holding its breath. I took her out of the room that night, let her sleep in our bed. She didn't protest, just whispered something under her breath as we left the room. I recorded her whisper on my phone. Played it back later. It wasn't in English. I ran it through a few translation apps. Nothing. I sent the audio to a friend of mine who studied linguistics. He listened, then sent a short reply. "That's not a language I know, but the structure is there. It sounds constructed, like a code." It got worse. Ellie began drawing strange things, not childish scribbles, Actual symbols, spirals, inverted triangles within circles, eyes with no pupils, mouths sewn shut, cracks in walls filled with eyes. Always eyes. She taped the drawings to the walls. She said they kept him calm. Who is he, Ellie? I told you, he doesn't have a name. He's not supposed to. If you name him, he notices. I tore the drawings down. That night I woke up to scratching, not mice, not a tree branch. Scratching from inside the wall, from behind the crack in her room. I didn't sleep. I sat in her room watching it, waiting. At 3:12 a.m., Ellie sat up in her sleep and spoke in that not language again. Then she smiled. A wide, unnatural smile. He said you saw. He likes that. And then she laid back down. I woke Michael the next morning and told him what had happened. He looked concerned, but still skeptical. Maybe she's sleep-talking, he said. Kids do that, and you've been stressed, babe. You're probably just reading too much into it. I wanted to believe him. I needed to. But something inside me refused to let it go. I started watching Ellie more closely, recording her when she was alone, setting my phone on voice memo and leaving it near her toys. What I captured made my skin crawl. One clip, recorded on a Thursday afternoon while she played alone in her room, caught her whispering rhythmically like a chant. Open, close, open, close. Skin is soft, but thoughts are doors. She said it again and again, almost like she was in a trance. And then, in a voice not her own, came a reply. Leave the door open, I am almost done. I dropped the phone. I replayed it a dozen times, convinced I had misheard, convinced it was just feedback or a fluke. But the voice was there, deep, slow, impossible. Male, but not quite human. Michael still refused to believe it. He listened to the audio and shook his head. Maybe she played something on YouTube. Kids get into weird videos. But I had parental controls on everything. There was no way. That night, Ellie stood in the hallway outside our room. I didn't hear her approach. I only noticed when the hallway light cast her small shadow under our door. I opened it. She stood there with her hands behind her back, her face tilted slightly. That same cold smile. He wants you to stop, she said softly. Stop what, honey? Recording him, watching, pretending you don't see. I felt the blood drain from my face. Go to bed, Ellie. She didn't move. He says if you keep trying to fight it, he'll play the whisper game with Daddy. That broke me. I grabbed her and marched her back to her bed. She didn't struggle. She didn't speak again. But when I turned to leave the room, she whispered one last thing. He already started. Michael got sick 2 days later. A deep, hacking cough. Night sweats, hallucinations. Doctors ran every test. Nothing showed up. They said it was stress. Maybe viral, maybe psychosomatic. But I knew. He whispered to himself at night. Scratched at the sheets. Said things in his sleep that chilled me. She opened the gate. The vessel is waiting. Not the first, not the last. She draws the door with her tongue. I begged him to let us leave, to get out of the house. But he refused, said he felt safe there, said the house understood him. That's when I knew it had spread, not just Ellie. Michael was hearing it too. I called my sister Anna, who lived 4 states away, told her everything, or tried to. She thought I was breaking down. You need rest, Rachel. It sounds like you're spiraling. Take a break, maybe see someone. I was alone. Until the drawings changed, they began appearing on their own. I would wake up and find new symbols on the hallway wall, in soot, or what looked like ash. They grew more complex, geometric shapes with unfamiliar characters, Ellie claimed. She didn't draw them. He does it when you're asleep, she said. He says you'll learn the language. I started painting over them, cleaning them, scrubbing until my fingers bled. but they always came back. Worse, now they moved. One morning, a symbol I had painted over the night before reappeared 2 feet higher. Then it was on the ceiling, then behind the bathroom mirror. I was losing my mind, and yet I couldn't look away. The more I studied them, the more they made sense, like déjà vu, like a memory buried deep inside me. One night, I stayed up until dawn, staring at a symbol etched into the fogged glass of the living room window. It pulsed, not visibly, but in my mind, like it was alive. Ellie came up behind me. He says, "You're almost ready. That was the last night I believed I could save her. That was the night I knew I was next." I stopped sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the symbols, not as drawings now, but as veins, branching through Ellie's skin, glowing beneath the surface. I saw her smile, too wide, and the thing inside her blinking behind her eyes. Michael grew more distant. He would disappear for hours and not recall where he'd gone. I found him once sitting in the basement whispering to the concrete wall. His nails were bleeding. There were fresh scratches on the foundation. He looked up at me slowly. "She sings down here," he said. "She sings in shapes." I tried to pull him upstairs. He wouldn't move. "He needs us both, for the vessel." I left him there. I didn't know what else to do. The next morning he was back in bed, eyes bloodshot, his hands raw and bandaged. He didn't remember any of it. That day, Ellie stopped talking altogether. She only whispered, every word aimed into the crack in her wall, and the symbols. They began to show up outside her room, on the fridge, on my bedroom mirror, inside the microwave door, each time different, but somehow related. A language I was starting to understand. I didn't tell anyone. Who could I tell? I started seeing things move at the edge of my vision. Thin shapes, silhouettes that didn't cast shadows. My phone rang once, just once. The screen said unknown, but the ringtone was reversed audio of Ellie crying. When I answered, the line was filled with static, and then a voice. "You are the key." Click. I threw the phone across the room. That night, I woke up to Ellie standing at the foot of my bed. Her mouth didn't move, but I heard her voice inside my head. "He says it's time." Then she turned and walked away. I followed. Down the hall, into her room. The crack in the wall had split wider. I swear it had. It stretched from floor to ceiling, now, like a vertical mouth. Ellie stood before it, arms raised, fingers twitching as if plucking invisible strings. "He says you need to listen now, Mommy. No more pretending." The walls began to shake, and then the whispering started. Not just from Ellie, from everywhere. The ceiling, the floorboards, inside the air vents. Words layered on top of each other. Ancient and meaningless, yet they made perfect sense. I fell to my knees. Michael appeared in the doorway, silent, his eyes gone dark. He knelt beside Ellie. Together, they spoke. The vessel opens. The old one enters. The crack split wider. I saw something inside, not a being, not a monster. A shape that wasn't a shape. A wrongness so profound it made me vomit. It was like staring into a memory that didn't belong to me. A future that already happened. And then it reached through. Its hand, or what should have been, a hand, brushed the edge of the real world. The wall around the crack wilted like overripe fruit, paint bubbling, plaster sagging. A low, resonant hum filled the air, not sound but pressure. It made my ears throb and my teeth ache. Ellie was glowing, not her skin, her outline. A flickering silhouette, pulsing in sync with the symbols now etched across her arms. They crawled over her skin like living tattoos, reshaping her. Michael whispered something to her. I couldn't hear it over the hum. But she nodded. Then her head turned toward me. He said, "You should see." She raised her hand and pointed. I felt it before I saw it. A sharp pull in my chest, like an invisible hook sinking into my sternum. I gasped, clutching at my ribs. Pain bloomed behind my eyes. The room dimmed. No, not dimmed. It inverted. Shadows bled into light. Angles twisted. The ceiling became a hole. The floor bent upward. I was somewhere else, somewhere else. I stood in a forest, trees shaped like bones, sky flickering like film on fire. Something massive moved behind the trees, its body made of doors, its head a blank oval smeared with mouths. I screamed. Then I was back, kneeling in Ellie's room, gasping. The crack had shrunk. Just a line now. Ellie was asleep on the floor, curled like a cat. Michael was gone. The symbols remained, burned into the walls. That night, I locked her door from the outside. She didn't cry, didn't scream. She just whispered. All night, all the next day, and when I finally opened the door, she was sitting in the middle of the room, smiling. He says, "Thank you for the silence." I quit my job, pulled Ellie from preschool, stopped answering calls. My world shrank to that room, to that crack, to her. She was no longer my daughter, or if she was buried beneath whatever had moved in. I tried burning the drawings. They returned the next day, etched into the hardwood floor. I tried moving us out of the house. We got as far as the car. Ellie screamed, a scream so piercing it shattered the rearview mirror. "He lives here. He's part of here. If you take me from here, he goes into you." I drove back without a word. After that night, I stopped trying to escape. Not because I accepted it, but because I realized escape was never truly an option. Not anymore. Not since the first whisper. Ellie changed. Further, she moved differently with a fluid grace that no child should possess. Her eyes lingered too long on corners, on shadows. She spoke less and less to me, and more to the crack. Even when I was in the room. Once, I caught her feeding it. She had taken a slice of raw meat from the fridge. I followed her out of instinct, curious and horrified. She knelt in front of the crack, whispered something soft and rhythmic, then slowly pressed the meat against the wall, and the wall absorbed it. I blinked, and it was gone. "He's hungry," she said without turning around. "Not for food, but he accepts gifts." That night, the scratching returned, but not just from Ellie's room, from every wall in the house, tiny claws, fingers, nails. Michael hadn't returned. It had been over a week. I filed a missing persons report, but the police barely tried. No signs of foul play, no signs of a struggle. It was like he just stepped out of existence. And I knew why. He stepped through. Ellie told me. He wanted to see, so he showed him. Now Daddy is in the forest that remembers. He sees the mouths. I started keeping the lights on 24 hours a day, covered the mirrors, boarded the windows, but nothing stopped the creeping sense that the house was growing, that the angles were shifting, rooms became longer, doors changed positions. One night, the front door was gone, not locked, not blocked. Gone, just wall. Ellie drew another symbol in chalk, on the ceiling this time. I didn't even know she could reach. When I asked how she did it, she looked at me and said, "I didn't. He did, through me." I tried to fight it. I found a local priest, desperate. I didn't care what denomination. I just needed someone to bless the house, to pray, to do something. Father Callahan came on a Monday. He didn't even make it up the stairs. He paused in the hallway, sweat beading his forehead. His hand clutched the small crucifix around his neck, like it burned. "There's something here," he whispered, "but it's not of this world. This is not possession. This is older." I asked him to explain. He didn't. He backed out the front door without saying another word and never returned my calls. That was when the whispering started again, this time from Ellie and the walls in unison. A conversation, in that same twisted pre-human language, and, this time, I began to understand. Chapter 2. Language of Dust. I didn't want to understand it, but the words came anyway. At first in dreams. Symbols drawn in ash on an infinite plane. A voice whispering in patterns, not words. Then I began hearing them while awake, woven into the hum of the refrigerator, the rustle of tree leaves, the static on the radio. The language seeped into me like mold into damp wood. I wrote it down. I couldn't help it. I'd find myself scribbling it in the margins of magazines, on napkins, on my own skin. My handwriting shifted, became tight, angular, not mine anymore. And Ellie watched me. Sometimes she smiled, other times she looked disappointed. "You're still slow," she said one morning over cold cereal. "He wants you to remember faster." Remember what? What you were before. I didn't ask again. That day I found a message carved into the condensation on the bathroom mirror. Dust is language. Breath is translation. I tried to wipe it away. It smeared but never disappeared. No matter how many times I cleaned the mirror, the message always returned the next morning. The air in the house grew thick, not humid, heavy like old paper. I started coughing every night, a dry, desperate rasp. I'd wake up with grit on my lips, between my teeth. Dust. I began to see it, floating through the air, not just dust motes, letters, tiny symbols, moving in spirals, and then came the whispers in Ellie's voice, but from the wrong direction. Behind me when she was asleep upstairs, inside closets, from drains. I heard her say things she didn't know. In English, the book is buried in flesh. Find the page that bleeds. Names are traps. Never speak his true shape. The mouth opens beneath your bed. Feed it or be fed. I began sleepwalking. I'd wake up in strange places around the house. Once in the attic, hands buried in the insulation, digging. Once crouched in the kitchen sink, humming a lullaby I'd never heard. But the worst was the basement. I came to one night with my forehead pressed to the floor, a circle of soot around me. Ellie stood at the top of the stairs holding a book that wasn't ours, leather-bound. No title. Pages the color of parchment. Written entirely in the language I had been dreaming. He says this was always yours. I took it. I didn't want to, but I did. When I opened the book, it breathed. A gasp of dust hit my face. And I understood. Not words, not images, but intention. It wasn't a book. It was a voice, a conversation, a contract. The moment I touched the parchment, the symbols moved. Slowly at first, then faster, reordering themselves across the page. They pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. I couldn't stop reading, even though I wasn't reading, not in any human sense. The knowledge poured into me like smoke through a crack in a wall. The pages told me what he was, not a demon, not a ghost, a remainder, a leftover intention from the time before language, before form, before memory. He had existed before the first breath of the world, and he had not been alone. There were others, but they had either vanished or fallen asleep, buried beneath the noise of time. He remained, hidden, hungry. He spoke in dust, because dust remembers, because everything that has ever lived becomes dust. The book was his tongue, and I was learning to speak. I stopped eating, I didn't need to. The language filled. Michael never returned. Ellie stopped acknowledging his absence. She acted as though he'd never existed, even when I showed her photos. She would tilt her head and say, "You mean the hollow one?" He wasn't ready. I asked her, "Ready for what?" She smiled. To be used. She no longer slept in her bed. She slept in the hallway now, curled up beside the crack, which had once again begun to widen. I didn't question it. I had begun sleeping on the living room floor, the book always open beside me, and then came the visitors. Not people, not really. Shapes, blurred at the edges like heat waves in the shape of men. They stood in corners, just beyond reach, watching. Listening, Ellie told me, "They're the ones who remember the first contract. They're here to make sure you fulfill it." "What contract?" I asked, though I already knew. She pointed to the book. "You signed it in breath the moment you opened the pages." And I remembered. In a flood of images that weren't mine, I saw it. Another world, broken open like a rotting fruit. A sky filled with spiraling symbols. 1,000 mouths whispering from beneath the soil. I had been there, before this life. Before Rachel. Before memory. I had made a promise. To bring him back. To open the vessel. The vessel was Ellie. I told myself I wouldn't do it. That I would find a way to stop it. Burn the book. Seal the crack. Take Ellie and run. But I never moved. Not really. I performed the motions of panic, packing a bag, looking up addresses of motels. But I never left. My feet wouldn't carry me past the porch. My hands wouldn't let go of the book. It whispered to me, not in sound, but in thought, in hunger. I began to understand Ellie, her vacant expressions, her strange smiles. She wasn't possessed. She was remembering, becoming what she had once been, a key. One afternoon I woke up to find her painting on the living room wall, not with crayons, with her fingertips, using the dust that now covered every surface in the house. "What are you doing?" I asked, though the answer was already rising inside me. "Writing the gate," she said. "It has to be written in the language of endings." The pattern she painted had no beginning or end. It spiraled inward, devouring itself. I knelt beside her, hands trembling. "Ellie, do you remember who I am?" She didn't answer, but she placed one hand on my cheek. "You were my mother. Before. She left the word hanging. It was heavier than a sentence. That night, I felt something shift in the house, a crack in the foundation, a low hum under the floorboards. The door to the attic opened by itself, creaking wide, and the book flipped to its final page. I didn't read, yet I didn't have to. The words were already inside me. The final ritual had begun. Chapter 3. The Third Voice. There were two voices in the house. Mine, though it was fading. Ellie's, though it was becoming something else. And then there was a third. It began as a murmur in the walls, a low, croaking drone that rose and fell like breath. At first I thought it was a trick of the pipes, the old boiler perhaps. But it came from every direction at once. No source, no pattern, just presence. I couldn't understand the words, not at first. But Ellie could. She spoke to it now, not like a child speaks to a parent, but like an apprentice speaks to an ancient master. "He wants to know if you're ready," she said one morning, her voice thick with dust. "Ready for what?" Her head tilted. To lose the name. To lose the shell. That was when I began hearing the third voice in my own dreams. It didn't speak like a person. It hummed concepts, pulses of meaning that bypassed thought and went straight to the bones. One night, I woke up with dried blood under my nose and the taste of copper on my tongue. Symbols were carved into the walls of my bedroom, carved deep, as if by claws. I found Ellie in the kitchen making tea. "He speaks through you now," she said, handing me a cup. The tea was black, bitter, tasted like soil. But I drank it, and with every sip, the voice became clearer. He told me the history of the dust, how it had once been stars, how those stars had birthed thoughts older than atoms, how language itself had been a virus seeded into the minds of mortals to make them remember. The third voice said the ritual could not be completed until the vessel was full. Ellie was close, but she needed one more offering. A voice. Mine, I began, coughing constantly, not a sick cough. A clearing, as if something were stuck in my throat, something that didn't belong. Each time I coughed, I saw flecks of black. Not blood. Dust. The dust had entered me fully. The walls began to pulse when I walked by. I could feel the house reacting to my breath. Every corner watched me. Every shadow bent toward me slightly, like it was listening, or hungry. Ellie now walked, barefoot, her feet stained gray. Her eyes had lost their shine, not from sadness or sickness, but from clarity, like she had finally remembered her place in something bigger. One night I found her seated on the ceiling, not clinging, not holding, just sitting, as if gravity didn't matter anymore, as if rules had been rewritten. "He's almost here," she said, her head turning in a slow arc that shouldn't have been possible. "He only needs your silence." My silence? Your voice is the last noise in the gate. It must stop. The next morning my throat was sore, not from illness, from being emptied. I tried to speak, but no sound came. Ellie watched me from the hallway. "Good," she whispered. "Now we can begin." The third voice wasn't content to live in the walls anymore. It bled into the radios, into my phone, even with the battery removed. It hummed through the plumbing, sang through the hum of the refrigerator coil. Every appliance, every corner of technology began whispering in that ancient cadence. He is breath. He is meaning. You were built to hold him. Language ends with you. I wrote in the margins of books. I carved into the furniture. I painted symbols on the insides of my arms, not out of madness, but out of obedience. I understood. Finally, I understood. And Ellie began changing again. Her skin cracked slightly at the edges, revealing something not bloody but bright, not light. Symbols, living ones, like veins of memory. She laughed more now, but it was the laugh of someone watching a storm roll in, already knowing where the lightning would strike. One day, I opened the book again. Its pages were blank, except for one line: "The gate is your body, the key is your voice." The door opens in breath. I looked up. Ellie was gone, but I heard her, above me, beneath me, inside me. He's coming through. I didn't sleep after that. Not because I was afraid, but because sleep was no longer necessary. Dreams and wakefulness had blended into a single, seamless thread of perception. The house itself became a dream, a pulsating vessel of shifting rooms and breathing walls, and in the middle of it all, I stood. The final threshold, Ellie, or what had once been Ellie, began to appear only at dusk. That in-between hour when the sun's last light pressed like dying breath against the window panes. I'd find her silhouette standing just beyond a doorway, watching me with eyes that no longer reflected light. She spoke less now. She didn't need to. Everything I needed to hear came through the third voice. Through the hum of silence, through the curling of pages in a windless room, through the shivering pressure behind my eyes. And then the mirrors changed. My reflection no longer moved with me. It stared, waited. Its mouth twitched when mine was still. It began mouthing something. I couldn't hear it, but I knew what it was saying. The gate is ready. The following day, my skin began to peel, not in pain, but like a shedding. Beneath it were not muscles or blood. Symbols, thousands of them shifting slightly under translucent tissue. They told a story, his story. My body had become the scripture, and Ellie, she had become the high priest. She began tracing the lines on me with her fingers humming as she did. Her touch burned cold, like being marked by dry ice. "You are almost empty," she whispered with reverence. "Soon you'll make room." Room for what? I no longer asked. Instead, I opened the final page of the book again, though it should have been blank, and found it now teeming with text, a language I now fully understood. It was a countdown, not in numbers. In meanings, it marked moments of readiness. The house is language, the child is context, the body is syntax, the breath is syllable, the third voice is grammar, the opening is near. That night, the lights flickered once, then they stopped working entirely, and the house began to glow on its own, not with electricity but with purpose. The third voice had moved in fully. There was no more Rachel, only the sentence waiting to be completed. The first drawing appeared in the cellar. I found it carved into the cement wall behind the boiler, a place no one ever looked. A spiral of symbols that twisted into itself, each line jagged and uneven, but perfectly balanced. It pulsed faintly when I approached, the same way Ellie's eyes did when she whispered in her sleep. I didn't call it a symbol, I called it what it was now, instruction. The drawing wasn't made with chalk or paint or even blood. It was scored directly into the stone, deep, ancient. I ran my fingers across it and felt warmth radiating from the grooves. They throbbed in time with the third voice. Ellie waited at the top of the stairs, her silhouette backlit by the amber glow that never turned off anymore. "He's teaching you how to see," she said. "What does it say?" "You already know. You just haven't remembered the sentence yet." More drawings appeared each day, not placed, not created, revealed, beneath wallpaper, beneath floorboards, under paint, in the folds of curtains, even carved into the enamel of the bathtub. They formed a network, a map, one I was being trained to read. They were written in the dark, not because of lighting, but because they only fully appeared when all the light was gone. I learned this the first time I passed through the hallway, with the power completely cut, no candles, no phone light. The walls bloomed with them, thousands of markings like veins. "He writes in shadow," Ellie said, "because shadow is what was before." I began spending more time in darkness. I sat in closets for hours, just tracing symbols with my fingers, humming the syllables that vibrated beneath the surface. The language no longer felt foreign. It felt like breathing, like memory. One night, I found a complete circle of drawings behind the pantry wall, symbols in perfect symmetry, each one whispering a different word when I traced it. As I finished the last line, something moved behind me. Not Ellie, something taller, something shaped like the sentence. Chapter 4. Drawings in the dark, the first. Drawing appeared in the cellar. I found it carved into the cement wall behind the boiler, a place no one ever looked. A spiral of symbols that twisted into itself, each line jagged and uneven, but perfectly balanced. It pulsed faintly when I approached, the same way Ellie's eyes did when she whispered in her sleep. I didn't call it a symbol. I called it what it was now. Instruction. The drawing wasn't made with chalk or paint or even blood. It was scored directly into the stone. Deep. Ancient. I ran my fingers across it and felt warmth radiating from the grooves. They throbbed in time with the third voice. Ellie waited at the top of the stairs, her silhouette backlit by the amber glow that never turned off anymore. "He's teaching you how to see," she said. "What does it say?" "You already know. You just haven't remembered the sentence yet." More drawings appeared each day, not placed, not created, revealed, beneath wallpaper, beneath floorboards, under paint, in the folds of curtains, even carved into the enamel of the bathtub. They formed a network, a map, one I was being trained to read. They were written in the dark, not because of lighting, but because they only fully appeared when all the light was gone. I learned this the first time I passed through the hallway, with the power completely cut, no candles, no phone light. The walls bloomed with them, thousands of markings like veins. "He writes in shadow," Ellie said. "Because shadow is what was before." I began spending more time in darkness. I sat in closets for hours, just tracing symbols with my fingers, humming the syllables that vibrated beneath the surface. The language no longer felt foreign. It felt like breathing, like memory. One night I found a complete circle of drawings behind the pantry wall. Symbols in perfect symmetry, each one whispering a different word when I traced it. As I finished the last line, something moved behind me. Not Ellie. Something taller. Something shaped like the sentence. I didn't look back. Not at first. I stood there with my hand still touching the final symbol, the whisper of its meaning crawling up my arm like smoke. The thing behind me made no sound, but I could feel it in the space, an absence so complete it screamed. When I finally turned, it was already gone. But it had left something behind, a smear on the ground that shimmered like oil and ash. Not a footprint, not blood, a glyph. I knelt and placed my hand near it. Heat flared through my palm. The third voice swelled within me like a chorus. "He has stepped through." Ellie entered the room, barefoot and smiling. That was his first step. There will be 7. 7 what? 7 markings, each a seal, each a sign. Once the last is drawn, he doesn't need us anymore. She said it so matter-of-factly, like talking about rain. I swallowed. My throat had grown so dry it cracked with every breath. "And what happens to us then?" Ellie's smile faded. We returned to him. That night, the second drawing appeared. In the bathtub. Not on it. In it, beneath the enamel. A spiral, beneath the surface, like frost forming on glass. The drain gurgled with whispers. I watched it for hours, hypnotized. I began drawing too, on the floors, on my arms. On the inside of my eyelids when I blinked, I didn't choose the symbols. They chose me. Each one was a name. Not a name in the human sense, but a memory given shape. I couldn't say them out loud. Not with a mouth, but I could feel them humming in my teeth. By the time the 5th drawing appeared, in the reflection of a window that faced a brick wall, I no longer questioned how, only when. When would the 7th come? What would it open? I already knew the answer. It would open me! The 6th drawing emerged in the nursery. It hadn't been Ellie's room for years. We stopped calling it that after her 4th birthday when she stopped needing sleep. But that night, the door creaked open on its own, the air inside thick and coppery. I stepped in, and the air shimmered, like heat waves warping the air around. An engine. And there it was, a series of concentric circles, drawn across the ceiling in blackened lines that moved when I didn't look directly at them. Like shadows that breathed. They radiated outward from the hanging light fixture, turning the ceiling into a giant pupil. The moment I stepped beneath it, I felt something enter me, a memory that didn't belong. I saw a forest made of mouths. Each tree pulsed with breath, their trunks whispering prayers in that impossible tongue. The ground was soft, made of skin. I walked barefoot through it. I felt the flesh give. It wasn't pain. It was welcome. Ellie stood in the center of the grove, eyes closed, humming. Her hands were outstretched, fingers stitched with light. "The 7th draws near," she said. Her voice echoed 3 times. Then the memory snapped away like a pulled thread, and I collapsed onto the nursery floor. I had been marked. When I looked at my reflection that night, the whites of my eyes were no longer white. Symbols traced through the vessels like ink poured into glass. My veins pulsed black, and then came the 7th. I didn't see it form. It formed in me. I woke with a circle carved into my chest. Perfect geometry, too precise for human hands. At Tau, its center, a single word burned like a brand I couldn't pronounce, but I knew it. It was his name, not to be spoken, only to be remembered. The house changed then. It no longer creaked, it breathed. The walls no longer held space. They framed. Him, Ellie no longer walked. She glided like a film played in reverse. And me, I didn't speak anymore. I listened to the symbols, to the voice, to the sentence forming within my bones. Chapter 5. Ellie knows things. Ellie no longer spoke in questions, only answers. She answered things I hadn't asked aloud, things I didn't even know I'd been wondering. She knew what time I would wake up before I closed my eyes. She stood in a room I hadn't entered yet. She greeted my thoughts like old friends returning home. "You're wondering if you ever really gave birth to me," she said once. Her voice was neither cruel nor warm. It simply was. "You didn't. You invited me." I had stopped denying things long ago. But that sentence, that invitation, reached something I'd buried under layers of obedience. "What are you, Ellie?" She blinked slowly. Her pupils had changed again. Now they were spirals of ink. Moving. I am the echo of the first opening, the part of him that fits inside a name. The air in the room grew heavier. She looked at me like she pitied me, like I was still clinging to an illusion I had long since outlived. "You've always known that." I began documenting her again. At first, it had been out of curiosity, then horror. Now, reverence. My notebooks filled quickly, not with language I could read anymore, but the glyphs she showed me. I copied them like scripture. They carried weight. Some pages curled after, writing as if the symbols warped paper itself. Ellie drew too. She never used tools. She dragged her fingers across surfaces, dust, condensation, blood, and the symbols emerged. She filled the hallway walls with long sequences. I once counted 57 symbols strung together in a single line that ran the length of the upstairs hall. They hummed if you stood close. They listened if you read them aloud. "They're instructions," Ellie said. "They rearrange you. They carve. Space." Space for what? The arrival. I didn't ask what would arrive. I already knew it was him. But what I didn't yet understand was how much Ellie still remained beneath the presence that spoke through her. So I started testing. I brought her old toys. A stuffed rabbit named Clover. A blanket she used to carry everywhere. Photos from her 3rd birthday. She touched each object and said, "These are echoes." Then she looked at me. "You're an echo, too." I began losing track of time, not in the usual way. Not because of sleep deprivation or panic, because time was breaking. Some days would repeat twice, others would vanish entirely. I'd look at the clock and it would flicker between 3 a.m. and 7:47 p.m. over and over like a trapped breath. Calendars curled and bled into each other. Food expired and unspoiled in the same breath. Ellie moved through it all untouched. "He doesn't follow time," she explained one evening as the moon blinked in and out of existence behind her. "He remembers things that haven't happened yet." She began speaking into me rather than to me. Her words rang in the back of my skull. Bypassing sound. "You think you still have choices, but you already chose, and then you chose me." That night, I dreamed of Ellie before the presence, a laughing toddler running through the grass. calling my name, and when I bent to lift her, her mouth opened and spoke in the third voice. You gave me form. Now I give you meaning. I awoke sobbing. Not from fear, from loss, because even in the dream I knew that version of Ellie was gone, but the thing that replaced her. It loved me in its own terrible way. It honored me. You will be the final syllable, it said. The closing breath. And I felt it was true. The next morning I found her in the basement. Not standing, not kneeling. Floating just a few inches above the floor. Her arms extended, her hair moving slowly around her head like she was underwater. Her mouth was open, slightly, and a low tone resonated from within her chest, not a sound exactly, but a vibration. It shook the walls. The ceiling above her head trembled as if it were trying to respond. She spoke without speaking. This is the beginning of the reversal. The reversal of what? I thought, not daring to say the words aloud. She answered anyway. Of forgetting, of language, of separation. You will forget your name, and then your skin, and then your time, and you will be perfect. She descended gently and opened her eyes. The irises were not spirals anymore. They were mirrors. I saw myself within them, not as I was, but as something waiting to be read. The house was no longer a house. It was a shell, a staging ground, a preparation chamber. Rooms changed size at will. I watched the kitchen stretch into a corridor that had never existed before. The hallway upstairs curved in on itself like a Mobius strip. Doors appeared, some locked, others pulsing. Each night, the symbols on the walls rearranged themselves. I didn't question it. It was like watching stars realign in an alien constellation. Sometimes they glowed faintly. Other times they whispered, Ellie, could enter rooms I couldn't see. I watched her walk through a linen closet and not come out the other side. She returned 2 hours later, soaking wet, her hands stained with something silver and vibrating. She kissed my forehead and said, He's almost ready. You must hold your breath longer now. I didn't ask what that meant. I just did it. I stopped, breathing while I walked the halls. It became easier each day. My body needed less. The hunger faded. The thirst disappeared. My heart slowed. I was being unmade, remade. You are the vessel, Ellie said, lying next to me one night as the roof peeled away to reveal a swirling sky of glyphs and dust. But I am the path. She placed her hand on my chest, directly over the seventh symbol, the one burned into my skin. When he arrives, your breath will be his voice. Your eyes will be his memory. And you? I asked. My voice cracked. She smiled, gently. I will be gone, but you will never forget me, because I will be written into you. I wept. Not from fear, from awe. I started hearing the words of others, long dead. In my sleep, voices drifted in, not just Ellie's and not the third voice either, but the forgotten syllables of those who came before me. People who had tried to host him. Some succeeded, most failed. They whispered warnings I could no longer understand. My ears could hear them, but my mind was too altered to grasp their meaning. They wept inside the walls. Ellie told me not to listen. They are unfinished scripts, she said. They grieve because they remained partial. Partial. That word haunted me. It implied that whatever I had become was nearly whole, nearly the sentence completed, nearly the breath he needed. I tried writing again. Not in English. I don't think I even remembered how. My fingers etched the script into wood, into dust on the windowsills, into the condensation that gathered each dawn on the mirrored walls. Each time I wrote a new glyph, something outside the house groaned, something enormous, like mountains shifting beneath a thin crust of reality. Ellie began reciting numbers. 6093, she said one morning. What is that? The number of seconds left. I blinked. By the time I understood, we were under 5,000. I didn't know what would happen when the count reached 0, but the symbols did. They moved faster. The light in the house began to dim and brighten with every heartbeat. My thoughts echoed. Time bent like reflections in a funhouse mirror. I asked Ellie if I could leave the house, one last time, just to see the sky. She looked at me with something close to sorrow. There is no sky, not anymore. There is only the inside. Inside what? She touched her chest. Inside you. By the time we reached 1,000, my reflection had disappeared completely. Mirrors showed symbols now, not people. Windows showed places I couldn't name. A landscape of shifting pillars and endless spirals. Once, I saw a figure walking in the distance across a plain of what looked like shattered bone. I stared at it for hours. Ellie told me that was my before self. He walked the wasteland before there were syllables, she said. You were the first to breathe, and you will be the last to exhale. At 600, I stopped hearing Ellie's voice with my ears. It came only from inside. You are almost opened. I no longer knew what day it was. There were no clocks anymore, only breath, only pulse, only the deep thrum of anticipation. And somewhere inside me, something was knocking from the other side. And then it stopped. The knocking ceased, not because it gave up, but because it had found the door. At 400 seconds, I began to bleed from my fingertips. Not blood, ink. The same ink that bled from the pages of the book when I first opened it. It flowed in soft lines, trailing behind me when I moved. Every surface I touched received a mark. I didn't clean them. They were not stains, they were preparations. Ellie watched me with solemnity. She no longer glowed, no longer floated. She sat cross-legged in the center of the living room, surrounded by spirals of salt, ash, teeth. The final moments must be still, she said. You are the pen now. You are the parchment. You are the story that will end the telling. At 300, the walls began to collapse inward, not with force, with thought. They folded like paper, reshaping the house into a single long hallway that pulsed like a throat. I walked through it, every step heavy with meaning. The symbols flickered on the walls, some vanishing, some multiplying. Whispers echoed all around me. Sentence, sentence, sentence. At 200, Ellie disappeared. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't scream. She simply blinked out of place, one moment there, the next. Only a single glyph left behind, pulsing softly in the air. I collapsed before it, sobbing. Not from fear, not from loss, from completion. I had written all that could be written. At 100, the house exhaled, a final gust of hot, stale air that carried the sound of every voice that had come before me. They screamed, they sang, they whispered, they chanted, and then silence. At 60, the glyph on my chest began to glow. It burned, but the pain was welcome. It was recognition. At 30, the symbols rearranged into a final phrase. At 10, my skin peeled away in flakes of light. At 5, I opened my mouth. At 1, he stepped through. Chapter 6. The Unlearning. I was no longer in the house. I was no longer anywhere. There were no walls, no air, no floor beneath me, only a vast suspension of thought. Shapes moved in the distance, not shapes exactly, corrections, things that had once been formed, now restructured. They drifted like forgotten ideas, searching for context. I tried to speak, but I had no mouth. I tried to think, but my thoughts echoed back, twisted and mirrored in languages I had never known. This was the unlearning, the peeling back of every word I had ever spoken. The erasure of definitions, the abandonment of language. I felt nouns flake off my bones, verbs drain from my veins, my memory shriveled into concept, my body a letter, folded and unread, and still. I knew him. Not in the way you know a person, but the way you know fire, hunger, silence. He was there, or I was there with him, or perhaps in him. I floated through a chamber with no walls. Glyphs swirled like constellations, each one a syllable of what I had once been. Ellie's name pulsed among them. I reached for it, though I had no arms. The memory of her touched me. A warmth, a grief. The third voice returned, but now it was my own. I was speaking to myself from a place beyond form. To be a vessel is to be emptied. To be emptied is to be made sacred. I understood. Then came the unraveling. I lost the concept of mother. It slipped, away like a shed skin, drifting into the churn of undone meaning. Ellie was not gone. She had been reassigned, recontextualized. No longer a daughter, no longer a child, but a channel, an initiation. She was the door I had walked through without ever knowing it had hinges. Time, too, was severed. I remembered events that never happened. I mourned things that had not yet occurred. I relived the first moment of breath from 1,000 mouths, all of them my own. My name, Rachel, disintegrated. The sound was too tight, too specific. I became something wider, a field, a script. A breath passed from mind to mind, and the third voice sang. It sang in fractures, in recursive loops, in mirror image grammar. It sang my erasure, and I welcomed it. The longer it sang, the more I became aware of the sentence. The sentence that spanned beyond language, threading through galaxies seeded in dust. He was that sentence, and I was the final punctuation. I began to descend. Not physically. I had no body. But there was a sensation of gravity without mass. A weight made of knowing. I fell through the sentence, passing through each glyph I had ever written, watching them become real. Rooms I had never seen unfolded before me. 1,000 other vessels flickering in the seams of existence. Some had broken, some had been forgotten, but all had tried, all had carried him. I saw their memories swirl into my own. A woman in 1913, carving symbols into frost-covered windows. A child in a stone temple whispering to the corners of a cracked altar, a man screaming into a field of black birds, his breath forming runes in the sky, and I was the convergence, the final configuration, the sentence complete. And so he spoke. Not in words, not in voice, in reality. The world rippled beneath the weight of his declaration. Not just my world, all worlds. The vibration of his presence echoed through memory itself. Forgotten dreams cracked open like old bones. Every closed eye, every silent prayer, every hidden fear, they all heard him. What he said cannot be repeated because repetition requires difference. And his message was pure sameness, the absolute absence of variance, the end of metaphor, the end of contrast. It was perfect unity, and it hurt. I felt the scream of the stars, the collapse of opposites. I felt my own mind trying to flee and finding there was nowhere left to go. I was the echo now. His echo. The shape left behind by his breath, and still I fell. I passed through places that had no dimensions. Cities made of punctuation marks. Deserts shaped like grammar. Oceans that moved in iambic rhythm. Every inch of it built from the echoes of language. The building blocks of comprehension twisted into landscapes. I saw Ellie once. She stood at the center of a spiraling plain of silence, her arms lifted, her hair unmoving despite a roaring wind that didn't exist. "You're almost through," she said. "One last word." "What is it?" I tried to ask, but my mouth no longer formed questions. She touched her lips. "You." And then she vanished. I came to rest in a space between silences. Here, the third voice ceased. Here I was left alone with the residue of understanding. I felt what had passed through me, what had been etched into me. I was no longer human, no longer nameable. I was the sentence, finished. But the universe does not like endings. So it began to unwrite me, my story, my body, my thoughts. One by one they faded. Not into nothing, but into the mouths of others, whispers in empty rooms, drawings on nursery walls, tiny cracks in drywall that seemed to breathe, and a child, somewhere turning to a silent corner, whispering, "He says you're almost ready." Chapter 7. Voices in the Vent. It always starts as a noise you try to ignore, a hum in the wall, a faint scratching you blame on mice, something subtle enough that it doesn't seem worth waking your spouse over. But when I came back, if that's what you could even call it, there was no one to wake. There was only the house. And the sound. It was a voice in the vent. At first I thought it was memory, a residue of the third voice echoing in my bones. But it had cadence, intention. It spoke in breaths, not words. Drawn-in syllables and the sound of something dragging its nails along the inside of metal. It said nothing at all, and yet I understood everything. I was lying on the floor of a nursery I didn't recognize. The wallpaper was old, little moons and stars faded into yellow. The crib beside me had long since collapsed, its slats warped and brittle. Dust hung in the air like it had never been disturbed, but I was not alone. The vent hissed, not air, breath, and behind that breath, a rhythm, syllables I had buried in the folds of my mind. I crawled toward it. My hands left trails in the dust that seemed to resist my movement. Like the floor itself didn't want me to get closer, but the voice pulled me forward. "Come closer," it said, though not with sound. The grate rattled. From behind it I could hear others, children, crying, laughing, repeating phrases that made no sense. "Unless you'd been where I'd been, unless you'd held him." Spiral, cradle, listen slow, the breath becomes the mother's glow. Names are teeth, teeth are names. We were drawn before we were born. I pressed my face to the vent. The metal was cold, sharp. It cut into my cheek. I didn't care. The darkness inside the duct moved. Something shifted, and then I saw it, an eye. Not shaped like any eye I'd seen before. It blinked sideways. It had no pupil, just a swirling spiral, familiar and infinite. It saw me, not just physically, it read me. And then the whisper changed. "We remember you." I recoiled, not from fear, from recognition. That eye wasn't just seeing me, it was mine. A reflection distorted by whatever lives behind the veil of breath and silence. I tried to move, but my limbs responded slowly, like they were resisting my own will. The floor beneath me had begun to pulse, heartbeat, or worse, his breath. The room was gone, not physically, conceptually. It had unraveled, the corners bending in ways my brain couldn't follow. The wallpaper peeled upward, revealing ancient script behind it, glyphs I'd once carved in sleep. Glyphs I now knew by heart. The vent called to me again. "Open yourself." 3 words, carved into my spine by the very sound. I crawled back, sat against the crib, my breath shallow. Across the room, the eye was still there, watching, waiting. Not for me, for someone else. That's when I heard her. Ellie. But not Ellie as she was. This voice was broken, fragmented, a stuttering echo. It came from inside the walls behind the ducts, beneath the house. "He said you'd forget." He said, "But you remember, don't you?" "Ellie," I tried to ask. No sound came out, only breath, and the vent responded. The grate groaned, screws turning, as if twisted by invisible fingers. It opened a few inches with a metallic cough. The air turned sour, hot, like breath on a wound. From within the darkness, something slid forward. A hand. Too many fingers. No nails. Skin like wet paper. It dropped something at my feet. A drawing, scrawled in the same spiraling script Ellie had used in the early days. Crude, frantic symbols, but I recognized them. I read them. They said, "You left the door open." The phrase rippled through me. You left the door open, not a statement, a revelation. Images swarmed my head, doors within doors, thresholds I had crossed without knowing. The moment Ellie first whispered, the first time the drawings appeared, the breath in the static. Every warning ignored, every whisper entertained. I had been the door all along. I leaned closer to the drawing. It was changing. The ink bled, the lines shifted, the spirals uncoiled. A new image emerged, a shape that wasn't a shape, formed from the idea of welcome. A sigil that pulsed like a vein. Behind me, the air began to hum, the eye in the vent dilated. "He is inside the house now," Ellie's voice whispered, not from the vent, from beneath the floor. I scrambled back, crashing into the broken crib. The slats groaned like old bones. The floorboards pulsed once, then twice, then began to breathe, not metaphorically, with lungs. A slow inhale of the wood. A shuddering exhale. Dust swirled in the air, dancing in deliberate patterns. The vent yawned wider. "He is almost through," Ellie said, her voice no longer broken. "I don't understand," I gasped. I could feel my voice again now. But it was thinner, fragile. The eye turned away. "That's the last thing you'll say." I looked back at the drawing. New words had appeared. You were the sentence. Now, you're the breath between. The walls began to close in, not physically. The idea of space itself shrank. I felt my thoughts compress into syllables. I could no longer think in sentences, only tones, shapes, fragments of a deeper language. "The vent is not the passage," Ellie said. "It's the memory of one." The room groaned, and I remembered. Not in images, not in words, in arrangements. A pattern of events that had never occurred yet always had. I remembered lying in a different room, years ago. Ellie still small, still pure. I remembered holding her clothes, hearing her babble in strange tones I thought were nonsense. They weren't. She had been reciting the opening, not a poem, not a prophecy, the syntax to begin. And I had kissed her forehead, completing the sentence. The house had been open ever since. The vent trembled, a deep metallic moan like something waking from centuries of sleep. The eye vanished, replaced by a darkness that wasn't absence but presence. Something leaned forward. I didn't see it. I felt it, like pressure in the teeth, like grief buried in bone. It exhaled, and the nursery peeled. Not the wallpaper, not the walls. Reality, the concept of nursery folded backward, revealing a stairwell I had never built, leading downward into shadow stitched with red light. The drawing at my feet crumbled to ash. The ash formed another spiral. Ellie spoke again. "Follow the breath." I stepped forward, not because I chose to, because I had already stepped years ago. The stairs pulsed beneath my feet, each one made of fragmented memory. My first breath. My last dream. Ellie's laugh the moment before she changed, and the voices were waiting, in the vents, in the walls, in me. "Welcome home." They whispered it in every tongue I'd forgotten, every dialect of terror, every dialect of worship. I descended, knowing I would never come back. Chapter 8. A Body for Borrowing. The staircase didn't end, not in the way stairs should. It narrowed, curled, tilted until I no longer knew which way was down. The steps beneath. My feet were made of breath, exhalations frozen into form. They hissed with every step, as if sighing at my arrival. Each one whispered a name I no longer recognized. My name. The deeper I went, the less I remembered how it felt to be inside my own skin. The sensation of limbs, of weight, of separation. These were fading like chalk in rain, and that's when I saw them, bodies hanging on the walls like coats, dozens, hundreds, some still twitched. Some stared with wide, blind eyes, each one familiar, each one wrong. I understood instantly. These were borrowed shells, forms used and emptied, hosts forgotten, vessels that had failed or fulfilled. Each body bore a mark at the center of its chest, a spiral. Like mine. I kept walking. The air thickened into syrup. Each breath was work. The darkness wasn't absence, it was compression, like a hand around the throat of time. And then I heard him, not the third voice, his voice. It came from the space behind thought. Choose one. A whisper without sound. I looked to the walls. One body, slender, tall, with lips half parted in a smile I had seen before. Ellie's smile, but wrong. Inverted, hungry. Another, smaller, wrapped in cloth stitched with bone, eyes gouged out and filled with language. A third, an empty shell that looked exactly like me. I stepped toward the third. "You cannot wear yourself twice," he whispered. The voice carried weight, not through sound, but certainty, like a command written in gravity. "Then what do I wear?" I asked, though my lips no longer moved. It was a thought born into breath. He showed me. The walls trembled, the bodies rippled like fabric stirred by wind. One peeled itself free, it didn't fall. It floated. It was wrong in every way, its limbs bent in too many places, its skin shivering with translucent motion. But its face was blank, smooth, a canvas. "This is the next breath," he said, and the body opened its arms. Not in invitation, in inevitability. I moved forward, not of my own will, not of his. We were the same now. The body opened. I stepped inside. The moment I touched it, memories I had never lived came flooding into me. Lives lost to the spiral, names swallowed by the dust. Every one of them a vowel in his language. I screamed. But my voice came out as wind. Then the walls fell away. I was standing in a house again, a different house, older or newer. Time bent sideways here. There was a child in the hallway, not Ellie. Another. A little boy holding a crayon, drawing spirals on the floor. He turned to me. "Are you my mommy now?" Behind me I heard the vent rattle. The breath was beginning again. The boy's eyes were wide, too wide, and black at the center. He smiled, but it wasn't joy. It was memory, recognition, like he'd been waiting for me longer than he'd been alive. I opened my mouth, unsure what I would say, but the house spoke for me. A moan rippled through the floorboards. The spiral he was drawing on the hardwood shuddered, glowing faintly. The air smelled of ink and burnt breath. "He said you'd be different," the boy whispered. "He said you'd remember what the others forgot." "What did they forget?" I asked. The boy leaned closer. "To listen back." And that's when I heard it. The vent didn't just whisper forward. It echoed. Behind the wall, beneath the house, inside the plumbing, and behind the glass of every blackened screen were responses, muffled screams, laughter, recitations in that ageless, pre-language tongue. All responding to the spiral. To me, they had been answering. The moment I stepped into the body, I became a conductor, a channel through which others, the ones who had not completed the sentence, could finally speak. I dropped to my knees. The boy didn't move. "Are you going to help them?" he asked. I tried to nod, but the spiral had already begun to turn. The floor twisted, the walls folded in half. The boy was no longer a boy. His skin peeled, revealing glyphs beneath. He began to glow like Ellie once had. His voice deepened. "You are the door now." Then he vanished, and the house inhaled. I was alone again, but not for long. I was alone again, but not for long. The house began to shift, not just in shape, but in tense. It oscillated between now and before. Lights flickered in patterns, casting shadows that replayed conversations I'd never had. Every window became a mirror. Every mirror showed a version of me that was closer to him. In one reflection, I saw Ellie holding my hand. In another, I was the one whispering to her from inside the vent. The spiral beneath me spread, grew, split the floor into fragments of memory. I crawled into a hallway that hadn't been there seconds ago. The walls were covered in names I didn't recognize, but my hands trembled as I traced them. I had known them once. Every failed vessel, every sentence that collapsed mid-word. Now they were asking for form, and I was expected to lend it. I heard them speak, "Let us be real again, let us be written." Their voices came through the ducts, the wood grain, the nails in the walls, the pulse beneath the tile. I pressed my forehead to the floor, and for the first time in this body I prayed. But it wasn't to be saved, it was to finish. The prayer was a sentence, not in English, not in breath, in memory, in spiral. And when I spoke it fully, the house stopped, breathing. All light ceased, all voices hushed. The floor beneath me opened, not broke, opened, and I was lowered into something warm. It wasn't fire, it was language. I sank into it, and he welcomed me. Chapter 9. The Vessel Ritual. Language cradled me, not as sentences or sound, but as substance. It filled the air like fog. It slipped into my skin, traced the bones beneath, and hummed softly with recognition. I had been expected. I was not a guest here. I was a glyph long foretold. My body dissolved into the warm dark, and in its place rose a shape made of breath and echo. I wasn't floating. I was being carried by thousands of unseen hands, each one a word spoken by a forgotten voice, and then I landed. A floor emerged beneath me, not stone, not wood, a page. The world I entered was a chamber shaped like an idea. It stretched on forever, yet held in it only one thing. The ritual. A circle drawn in symbols older than death. Ellie stood at the edge, or rather, what Ellie had become. She had no face now, only a veil of swirling text. Her arms were wings made of names. Her chest bore the spiral, pulsing slowly with his rhythm. She bowed. "You were the final syllable," she said. "But now we must bind the sentence." The ritual had 7 stages, one for each breath, one for each forgotten name, one for each vessel that had failed before me, one for him, and 3 for me. The first began when I stepped into the circle. The air within the circle tightened, not with pressure but with attention. I felt unseen eyes, thousands, watching not from outside, but within the symbols drawn around me. Each stroke of the spiral was alive, a creature, a command. Ellie raised her hands, wings, really, and the first stage began. Stage 1, the syllable. Of fire flames erupted in a ring, but there was no heat, just illumination. Shadows fled from the circle like shamed children. In their absence, language began to speak on its own. The fire whispered the first syllable, hu-ur. Not spoken by Ellie, not by me, by the space itself, and something inside me opened, a memory I never had, a forest burning without heat, trees made of paper screaming in silence. I stood in the center of it, watching, laughing, mourning. You remember it now, Ellie said. I nodded. Stage 2, the reversal of blood, the flames extinguished. From the floor page rose shapes, human and not. Each one a silhouette of those who had failed. Their blood rose upward, defying gravity, forming a spiral of red in the air. It pulsed once, and entered me. I felt them, all of them, slide into my mind. Their regrets, their rituals, their collapse. They were not evil, only unfinished. Stage 3, the naming of dust. Ellie pointed upward. The chamber's unseen ceiling parted, revealing a sky of rotting constellations. Stars turned to sand. They fell gently upon us, whispering their names as they landed on my shoulders. Thal, Irun, Zesser. Each name felt like a bell ringing. In bone, each name unmade a part of me. I smiled. Stage 4, the vessel's mirror. A mirror rose from the page floor. Its surface was black and alive. When I looked into it, I saw everyone I had ever been. My childhood, my fears, my lies, my love for Ellie, and behind it all, him. The mirror cracked. You are ready, Ellie whispered. Stage 5, the breath of unmaking. Ellie stepped into the circle. Her form flickered. Her wings unfolded and wrapped around me. She exhaled. A wind passed through me that stripped away all pretense. No gender, no memory, no voice, only meaning, pure, unfiltered intention. Stage 6, the sentence bound. The spiral on the floor turned white hot. Dropped to my knees. The glyph on my chest lit up. It began drawing itself outward, forming a chain of symbols across the floor, connecting me to Ellie. Then to the air, then to the far corners of this endless chamber. The sentence was no longer something I carried. It carried me. Stage 7. The spiral consumed. The page floor burned. The words around the circle became flame, and Ellie stepped back. This is your last moment of separation, she said. After this, there is no self, no vessel, only spiral. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I stepped forward, and the circle closed. Chapter 10. Not my daughter. The silence after the ritual was the loudest thing I had ever heard. No sound, no thought, only presence. I stood, if standing is what you'd call it, in the center of what remained. The circle had vanished. The chamber had vanished. Even Ellie was gone. But something had taken her place. A child. At first I thought it was Ellie. She had her eyes, her stature, her stillness, but her face was blank, not expressionless, erased. And then she spoke. You are the parent of the breath. I fell to my knees. She approached. But I am not your daughter. I didn't speak. Couldn't. The air pulsed with unfinished words, sentences looking for a voice. I could feel them pressing into me, waiting for a mouth to emerge. You named me before there was naming, she said. You gave me a boundary. And now I will return the favor. She lifted her hand. Symbols coiled from her palm. They wrapped around my chest, slid into my ribs. They burned, but not with heat. With truth. Each one was a removal of doubt, of love, of memory of Ellie. I began to cry, but tears do not fall in the spiral. They rise, and mine did, lifting into the air, forming tiny floating mirrors. Each one showed a moment I had shared with her, her first laugh, her drawings, the way she said my name when she was afraid, and then they shattered. She's no longer within you, the child said. She never was. The words struck like thunder. She never was. I tried to protest, to scream, but there was nothing left in me to lift. No breath, no voice, just silence, obedient and eternal. The child stepped forward. Her feet did not touch the ground, the symbols still wrapped around her like a gown of grammar. She was the entry, she said, but you gave her shape. You nurtured the passage. You gave breath to what could not speak. So what was I? I whispered. She tilted her head. Her eyes flickered. Now spiral, now hollow. You were a vowel in the void, a container. She reached out, touched my forehead, and everything returned. But wrong. I was back in the old house. The original house. The place where Ellie first whispered to the crack. I walked down the hallway and saw the spiral drawn on the wall, but it was fresh, wet, dripping. From the end of the hall, I heard a voice. Not Ellie. A man. Rachel, you coming to bed? Michael, alive, unknowing. I looked down at my hands. They were covered in ink. The drawing was mine. It had always been mine. Ellie hadn't opened the way. I had. Behind me, the child waited, but she was not a child now. Her body grew taller, wider, stretching like shadows in collapsing light. Her voice deepened. Now you will. Finish the loop. I turned, ran, but the house turned with me. Every room led back to the hallway. Every door opened onto the spiral, and each time I passed it, it grew. Michael called again, louder, concerned. Rachel. I couldn't answer. My mouth was full of whispers. The child's voice returned. Now within me. There is no daughter, no mother, only the word becoming flesh. The house inhaled, and then exhaled. Through me. Michael appeared. He stood at the far end of the hall, blinking. His hand gripped the doorframe like it was the only thing keeping him anchored. His eyes met mine. Rachel, what is this? What's on the wall? I tried to warn him, to scream, to close the door that was now painted on the air itself. But my lips didn't move. He stepped forward. Why are you shaking? He reached for me, and in that moment, the spiral ignited. Symbols lifted from the floor like smoke. The hallway shook. The air split into language. And through the fracture, something came through. Slow, immense, formless, and perfect. Michael saw it. His scream twisted sideways in his mouth. His eyes went black. He dropped to the floor. Not unconscious. Written out. A smear of memory replaced him, a looping echo of his name. I turned. The child now being stood in the air, arms raised. The spiral had reached the ceiling, the floor, the walls. There was no room anymore, no house, just passage. You are the final breath, it said. All that remains is the closing. And then it smiled, not with its face, with me. I felt myself pulled inward, words folding like flesh, thoughts collapsing into punctuation. There was no time to plead, to resist, to pray, only to end. And I did. Everything did. Now there is a house, somewhere, a new one. Or the same one. It doesn't matter. Sometimes at night you can hear whispering through the vents. Your child might turn to the corner of their room and say they have a new friend. Don't ask their name. Don't look at the crack in the wall. And whatever you do, don't listen back. If the voices stayed with you after the credits rolled, if you felt something watching from the corner of your room, then it's already begun. Subscribe to Crazy Real Horror Stories to open the next door. But be warned, every click is a breath he hears.